Burgess here with Music Marketing TV. Today we're looking at Supermodal. We're going to be doing just a general introduction, looking at all the gizmos. We're going to be moving pretty quick. So if you're intermediate or advanced, it's going to be great for you. If you're a beginner, might be moving a little quick for you. We're going to create some basic bass sounds and just get to grips with what's capable, what Supermodal is capable of. So first off, we need a bass sound. So for this, I'm going to add a harmor. I'm going to add a unison 2, and I'm going to give this harmor a note at C3 because it's a nice juicy low note. And I'm going to send this harmor to the mixer right here. It's on channel 6, and I'm going to add the harmor in. Oh, let's add this harmor on a blank pattern. So we'll cut this and put that. So you know exactly what's coming in. You just saw me make it. I'll be pretty quick. The only thing I turned on was unison. And that's just so we have a bit of a stereo difference. It'll be kind of nice to demonstrate. So there it is coming on channel 6. It sounds like this. Cool. So now that we have this, let's go ahead. Let's grab Supermodal. So Supermodal is a bunch of, well, it's a filter plugin. There's the main filter. If we choose the blend to be over here on the main filter, it's just like a filter like you would expect. There's a low pass, a band pass, and a high pass. And the only thing you really have available to you here is just like the different topologies. You don't get like much more specific controls. It is a very fat sounding filter, and if you push the resonance all the way up, you can get self-resonance. Like so. Capable of some pretty crazy things. Going through here, we have a drive. So that's what it sounds like. We'll see more of the drive in action in a bit. And then you have the meat of this plugin. The reason it's cool, it is the modal area. So this is basically a bunch of bandpass filters. They are represented up here at the top. And then each bandpass filter has like a different, amount of amplitude. And this will imprint onto your initial sound. The cutoff over here, the frequency control, does control where these sit. So if we put the blend all the way over here on the other side, we're using completely the modal filter, no signal directly from the filter is being used. So if we now move this around, you can get some pretty wild sounds pretty quickly. Now, if you're unfamiliar with filter design, filters have a ringing period afterwards. And if you let this ringing get too long, it's considered bad usually, like in the context of EQing, but creatively it can be very interesting. And we have this decay parameter, which sort of gives us control over that. So if we have this a lot closer to 0, it's going to behave very much like just sort of a really resonancy filter like you'd be used to in an EQ. And if we choose maybe another mode, like maybe something a little more color, over to the vocal, perhaps. And if we bring this up a little more, we hear more of that ring. And if we really start pumping it, yeah. So anyways, that's how the decay is related. Now, I'm not sure if that's exactly what the decay is, but just from the basic filter design I've done, they spit out what's called an impulse response, and you usually want to bring this down to be very short. But in this case, I believe you're able to manipulate this, but don't quote me on that. I'm not sure if that's technically how it works, but there's a decay parameter there, and that's pretty much, it kind of controls how long it rings for, and it gives that sort of weird resonance response. So these two filters are related in that this controls how these behave. At the end here, we have a damping, which is basically just a high pass, or not a high pass, it's a low pass. So you can hear it sort of gives you a little bit more control over how bright it is. And then you have a partials. Now this actually removes filters from the algorithm or adds them in. So if we bring the partials down, you'll see the colors up here will start to disappear as you move it down some. So if we bring it up, we can do a high pass sort of maneuver this way. So this is kind of like an additive way of doing it, which can sometimes be a lot cleaner. So with these powers combined, we're able to do some pretty crazy resonancy things. So there are a bunch of different filter modes that behave how these bandpass filters are done. And if you're familiar with vocoders, the whole process feels very much like vocoding. You've got a series of filters, you send in a carrier, you filter the carrier according to some modulator, and then you send that out. And here we basically are sending in a carrier. We've got our modulator sort of pattern, but it's sort of being determined not by another sound per se, but just by a direct profile. So I kind of see this as like some weird bridge between a filter and a vocoder, which means vocodery type sounds are the kinds of sounds this is going to excel at. You can already hear just how that sounds. So yeah, each one of these, there's different categories. They've got like voice, these math ones that are sort of derived in cool ways. You've got some wood and like physical modeled things in here, like glass. And from what I understand, coming down the pipeline, you'll be able to create your own profiles if you want and get really crazy with it. I hear that's coming, but I'm just a guy. Take it for what it's worth. And we have some like more interesting sound design ones. So these areas that we can scroll on the Y are kind of related. So if you're looking to change the sound but not leave that vibe, you can sort of rely on these transform options a little bit. So that takes care of the basic sound design capabilities here of how the plugin works and what it does. What's really interesting is when you pick an interesting modal resonance and then move the filter around. And then you could even move the decay a little bit. We could high pass it a little. And this is, those sorts of sounds are going to be what you get out. You can write some really cool lead sounds with it. You could have it be this grimy, dubstep-y kind of thing. A lot of cool options. Now, of course, you're probably going to want to dive into modulation a little bit to make your life just a bit easier, because you could automate each one of these parameters. But if you look around on the plugin, oh, it's not here yet. We need to add something. So we have here these 4 modulation slots. And in here, you have these different modulation options. So the first one's a knob. And this knob can be connected to many things. Once you add a modulation slot, though, you'll notice these like little lines appear everywhere. And these little lines mean that that parameter is modulatable. So let's say, for example, that I want to modulate this with this knob. So I will do so by just clicking on it, and you can bring it up. What's real nice is the parameter itself, there's no wires. So sometimes you have to, when you want to do modulation, there's just wires that the plugin shows you where things are going. Here, it's just, you just click on it and you can like see, oh, slot 1, it's yellow. That's what's happening. So right now, when I move the knob, it's going to move it up. We could have it be negatively related so that it'll move it the opposite way. And there's a bipolar mode as well. I'm going to stick with positive because I think positive is just the most transparently straightforward one to do. And let's say that, hey, I want to also have this knob connected up to, let's say we'll move the transform option here. We'll have it go down a little bit. And so for that, I'll move this up a touch so we have room to go down. So that'll move down while this moves up. Now I've got this more complicated movement with just one knob as opposed to modulating or automating them individually. And we might say, hey, that's a little too much motion up here. Like that's not very useful. So we could come in here, click it, and just reduce it so it's not so crazy. And we might settle for something lower since we're only pushing up, since we're not using bipolar. And we might try out a different one. Like let's say these vocal ones could be interesting. And let's add in our low end again through the partials. And you can get some pretty basic growl kinds of textures out of there. You could take that and then distort the living heck out of it. We could try out putting the drive on it a bit. And almost always someone comments about the levels. We're doing sound design. Unless the clipping is like super bad, I'm just going to kind of let them be, because at any given moment, I might drastically make things softer. So I'm sorry if the clipping bothers you. It's just part of what I'm doing here. So, okay, so that's the meta knob. Up next, we have the ADSR. Now, the ADSR needs a trigger. If you just play it, like let's say, for example, we have this set up, and we have it like all the way up. So we would expect this to, go up and down, right? But if we play it, there's no movement. That's because this requires an external trigger. There's a couple different ones that use this. Well, there's 2 that come to mind directly, the ADSR and the Midi CV. So to do this, we're really quick going to set this up. This is different for each DAW. I'm going to come in here and go to the cog. And in the cog, this is for FL Studio, there's this second cog menu. And in here you have MIDI. I'm going to set the MIDI input port to port 2. So now Supermodal's listening over port 2 for MIDI stuff. So if I send a note, it'll tell it to do that over port 2. So I'm going to open up a plugin. This is the BSRO Articulate plugin. It's a Midi plugin. You could alternatively use Midi out as well, just FL Studio native. And I already have this in my template, so I'm just going to use this. So I'm going to set this over port 2, and when you don't set a channel, it's an omni channel. So port 2, and if I put down a note to match our other note here, I recommend doing this with a layer, by the way, but we'll just do it individually for now. Now we will hear it move, and don't forget we have this set up to control this right here, and it's also going to move the transform. So this will just follow this envelope for us. And say we want this to happen, you know, quarter notes, we could do so. Let's set a little gap between them. Yeah, so you might be going, how'd you know to do the gap thing? Sometimes when the notes are touching the commands, if it's monophonic, it might just ignore it. So you want to make sure there's at least a moment for it to like say, oh, the note's done. Because if they're overlapping a little like this, that command never gets sent and it ignores this command and just weirdness happens. So you might just want to get in the habit of tiny gaps for this kind of a thing. We could set it up. We could, of course, have a longer one. And you could see there's sort of this additive thing. It didn't start all the way at the beginning. It sort of keeps growing. Interesting thing with the ADSR. So that's the ADSR. Alternatively, while we're on the MIDI subject, there's a MIDI CV. And this can receive all kinds of CV signals. And there's a smoothness on how quickly the changes happen. So let me show you. We'll come in here. We'll have this go up to a G, and then a C, and then back down to a G. So this is going to move it around. This is great if you want to do key tracking types of things. And our notes here are very low, so we might bring them up a bit. And you can see it moving accordingly. We might want to get a little more aggressive with this. You can have it receive all these different signals. If we change the smoothness, it won't jump so suddenly. It'll put a bit of a glide on it. So this is very, very common, something I like to do, a very intuitive way, I think, to move modulation around. But that is the MIDI to CV. After MIDI to CV, we have in here the envelope follower. This just looks for a signal input, and there's some sidechain input, so an FL. Again, you come into here, you go to the processing tab, there's the sidechain input. And you need to route signal via sidechain in. I'm not going to do that right now because it's like this. That's just like, you know, if you want to use that, hopefully you know where to go, what to do. But we're not going to be diving into the sidechaining right now. But anyways, it follows the audio input. So this one's kind of like the envelope follower, the ADSR, except for it's dependent on what's coming in. This works really well with short sounds. This is a long sound, so it'll kind of trigger right away. So if we set this right where it's like jiggling around, we might get this to trigger a bunch of times. Yeah, and then you could set the attack and release. The sound's pretty constant loudness, so it doesn't keep re-triggering. But that's it. And you could set different triggers. You could use the right, the left. You could use both of them together, so on and so forth. But that's the envelope follower. You don't have, as you know, ADSR. It's just attack and release. So there's a bit of a difference there. So if you want to use ADSR, just know that. From here, you've got the random modulator. It's just completely random. And you can see things are already visually just kind of like moving around. And if we give these like much bigger values to sort of mess with, and we give this a rhythm of some sort and a bit higher of a rate, yeah, you can see it just sort of freaking out. There's a lot of potential here for like crazy trance stuff. I'm not going to dive into it, but I just want you to know that it's here. And then afterwards, we have the sequencer. I got everything else right. Yeah. So sequencer. Now the sequencer has these 16 rows. You could see the quarter notes, or at least the like main breakpoints, depending on your rate. What I really like about the sequencer is they have patterns, and you can automate this stuff. So let's go for our rate. Let's change it to something like 1/4. So this is quarter notes. We we've got our Batman symbol here. And then also in the shape, you can change the shape. This is also automatable. This is just beautiful being able to do this. We could go a bit slower. And you could, of course, like, let's go back to a bass pattern. You could, of course, set your own. So if you hold control and click, it'll just zero everything out. And then we could have our own. Now, right now, it's bipolar. So there's a negative and a positive version. We might want to change this to be monopole. Yeah, monopole. That's the word I'm looking for, which is where it's just positive. Only positive values are possible. Well, let's see. Like, let's try another mode. And, you know, you get your different options. So we could go for something a little more jagged, turn it on monopole. And okay, so that's all the modulation, but it gets crazier still. Before I forget, there's a ton of presets. Here they are. There's a bunch of them. You can check them out. Let's get a little bit crazier with the modulation, and then we'll call this good. At that point, you pretty much, you know, you can go crazy on your own. So I have here an envelope, or in fact, let's just go to the init preset and just start completely from scratch. Let's add an envelope. Okay, so here's our envelope. It's being controlled again by this MIDI that we've already set up before. And this right now, let's set this up to control this right here. And let's have it also move the drive, because why not? And let's have it move this downwards, because we're just getting crazy. We'll move the blend 100% over, and we'll move this down. In fact, we'll move this all the way down. And we'll move this just a bit more down. And we'll have this be one note. Let's bring the decay in. Okay, let's add a random modulator now. So in slot 2, we'll go random. We will give this just like some random rhythm number. We'll give it a rate of 1/4, and we'll modulate the transform by this amount. So now we have this sort of randomly moving about. It sounds like this. In fact, let's give this a faster rate, like 1/8. Let's move the rhythm down a bit, and let's just leave that as is and give this a more extreme value. And maybe let's change this over to something, or you know what? Let's just like randomly move this around too. Okay, so we're able to modulate our modulators, and this can sound pretty crazy. If you come in, you see the modulation right here is moving all about. This is going to give this just like a random boost in this direction. So if we like move this up, let's just make it 100%. So we'll see this like every time this hits, it'll be slightly random. And in order to emphasize this, maybe let's, oh, you know what? The envelope might not be the best choice for this, because this would make more sense on just one hit. Let's just hear it. Let's make this less extreme so that any values, because you hear how it's not triggering on some, it's because this pushes it off the edge, and we don't want that. So we're going to just have it a little bit lower. So now each time that it hits, it's slightly different. We might make this a lot lower and just have it be a subtle difference, just so our envelope is never quite the same. But you're able to modulate your modulators, which can provide some really cool options. So there's one more really cool thing you can do with modulation parameters, is you can make them stereo. So if you click on something you're modulating, there's a circle down here at the bottom. And let's just go all the way over to left, right, so we can have control over each one independently. We could have one modulate more than the other. So we could create a stereo image this way. We might want it to be maybe a little bit closer together. We could have them be the same by just bringing them together. Or we could have one move down while the other moves up. In order to do that, though, we're going to need this to be a little higher. We could have them both move up a little bit more, which makes a little more sense in this particular case. But anyways, that is your capabilities here. I actually like it when they're both pretty close, but not quite the same. Get that nice stereo image in there. Whoops, bring that back down. that is Supermodal. Hopefully this answers all your questions, goes over a bunch of different techniques, and you can see things can get pretty crazy, pretty fast. You can go everything from a static sound that's super resonancy, more of a vocoder type vibe, all the way to something that is just like just crazy psytrance type stuff like this. And this has been only with no automation. We haven't messed with much of the other parameters, and we have not even created a very interesting input. It's all just been a saw wave. But that is Supermodal. If you have any comments or questions, leave them down below. Subscribe and hit that bell icon for future videos, and have a blessed day.